Okay, let's have a look at the n8n interface here. So when we first load it up, we can see we have a couple of different panes. We have the left-hand side here, which just has the overview, the personal view, and any workflows that are shared with you. And then it has a few options here under the self-hosted version. For variables, for example, it's not available, and insights as well. You do get a little bit here, but you don't get a lot. So that is standard for the self-hosted option. And we'll just jump back here to the overview. So then we have a few different views here as well. We have the workflows, which is where our workflows are going to go. We have credentials, this is going to list all your credentials. And then we have the execution. So any executions of the workflows, they're going to be listed all there as well. So let's jump in and create a first workflow. So again, looking at the interface, we still have the left-hand pane there. So that's exactly the same. That hasn't changed. Now at the top, we've got this menu bar here, which is just showing things like personal. And this is a clickable link we can jump back to. We've got the name of the workflow that you can click on and edit. So it might say my first workflow. We can add some tags if we want to. And then in the middle, we've got editor or execution. So again, this will list the executions just for this particular workflow. So jump back to editor. This in the middle is called the canvas. So this is where all of the different nodes, the workflow actions are going to go. And then at the top right, we've got a simple switch here for inactive or active for turning the workflow on or off. I've got a share button, which lets you share your workflows with other people. A status here, this one is saved at the moment. And then workflow history. And then we've got a few options under the drop down here. We can duplicate this workflow. We can download it, which is just a JSON file, text file. We can rename the workflow. We can import from a URL directly. We can import from a file. And then we've got settings for the workflow. And we used to have delete. Now they've changed it to archive so that it does keep a copy of it. It's a soft delete. And under settings, we've got quite a few options here for the workflow. Generally, you don't need to edit any of these. You may need to edit the time zone if you want a specific time zone for that particular workflow. But generally, unless you're starting to get into the error workflows or talking about like the executions, then you generally don't need to edit that one. Any of the settings for the workflow there. Then we've got up the top right, just the GitHub stats. And then just below it down here, you can see when I hover my mouse up to the right-hand corner, another button appears just below the Add Node button. And this one is just for sticky notes. So it'll add a sticky note here. You can change the size of it. You can change the color. They've got a few limited options here. You can edit it and it's marked down in here. So this is like heading 1. Click off it and it'll change the heading sizes there using Markdown. So those are quite handy for laying out your workflow and explaining what is where and what it's all doing. And then we have the Add Node button, and that's the same as clicking this button here in the middle for adding the first step. We can click this button and this will open up the right-hand pane. So I'll come back to that in a moment. Down the bottom left here of the canvas, we've got a few options. We've got zoom to fit, which just zooms it in the canvas. So if I'm zoomed in, I click zoom to fit, it's just going to zoom out to the right kind of level, depending on how many nodes are in the workflow. Then there's zoom in, of course, and there's zoom out. There's also, if you are not at the default zoom, then you can reset the zoom. And you can also notice there's got these characters here. So if I press 0, then it will do the same thing. I didn't press 0, I pressed minus. If I press 0, it'll do the same thing there. This is minus, will go out, and plus will go in the keyboard, and then number 1 for the zoom to fit. So if you prefer using your keyboard shortcuts, you can use those as well. There's also an additional button down here, which is tidy up, which is a newer feature. So this will reorganize your nodes. Once you have a few nodes in your workflow, it'll just tidy it up for you. Organization. And then right down the bottom, again, another new feature that's been added is a log down there. So that's really handy. So that's it kind of for the interface there. The Add Nodes button. So the first time you come into a workflow, it's going to be adding the first step. It'll always pop up and look like this on the right-hand side. So we can search nodes, and there's certainly not millions, but hundreds of nodes available. But the first node is usually some kind of trigger node. So we have a few different options here. We have triggering manually, which is literally that you must click either this button over here or this button down here to trigger this workflow. It requires a manual press. We have an option around an app event. So maybe we can choose one of these applications. Again, as I said, there's hundreds here. We might want to choose one of them to trigger this workflow to start. We might have a schedule. And so we can add a schedule here. And as soon as I add a schedule node, you can see that the window changed there. So if I double click it again, it looks like that. I'll just remove it, add the schedule trigger. It opens, as soon as you add that node, it opens the node for you. And it has you the settings on the left-hand side for this particular node. And it will show any kind of output if it has any kind of output for this node. So for the schedule one, it is what it says it is. It will run on a schedule, so you can specify whether it's seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months. There's also cron, a custom cron job at the bottom here, and that requires a specific format that looks something like that, and it has very specific rules around how that works. Generally won't need to use that, but you can certainly look at the help here on the website that will give you information around that. So it's more complex kind of schedules, but generally you'll be using simple ones of hours and minutes, and you can see it's changing here. And then you can have rules as well around different kind of exceptions or different days you want to trigger it. Maybe you only want to trigger it every 5 minutes on Monday to Friday. So you could do that in here. And then settings are pretty basic. This is pretty standard settings for each particular node. It'll have at minimum kind of notes and display note and flow. And then there could be other options there depending on the flow. So that's a schedule trigger. Pretty straightforward. Then we'll jump down the list. The next one is webhook call. So this is where we're starting to get into workflows that are a little bit more interactive. So a webhook is really just listening for an event. That's what the hook part of it is. It's waiting for some data to be sent to it. And we'll go into this in a future video in a lot more detail, but there's lots of different types of methods that you can use here, whether it's looking for a delete event, whether it's looking for a get method rather, a head method, patch, post, hook. So these are all different endpoints, effectively different methods that you use to call this endpoint. So by default, it'll always pop up and show this test URL. You can click on it to copy it. And you can change the production URL. And you can actually see the only difference between these two is that it's got this dash test for test URL. You can see other than that, it's exactly the same. And you might require some authentication maybe when this endpoint is called. You can edit the path if you want to. It'll always default to this globally unique identifier, a GUID there by default. It'll be a random unguessable string of characters there. And then there's a few options around responding immediately when the last node is finished or responding to a webhook node. And you do use that for certain APIs or certain calls. And then you've got a few options as well, again, that are kind of more advanced options there around what you can do with the webhook node. One other point I wanted to note here, one thing I do when I do add a webhook node, I leave this GUID here, and then I'll just put a dash and I'll put, say, editing video. Whatever action is being performed by this webhook, or after we accept the information from this webhook, whatever actions come after, so what this workflow does, I like to add that suffix there. Makes it easier when you're looking at 5, 10 different webhooks in your other workflows. You know exactly what this webhook is doing rather than just looking at the string of characters and having to guess. So it's a little bit easier. So it's just a small note there. Adding a little suffix is quite handy. Okay, so that's the webhook. Remove that one. Then we've got form submission. So you might want to have a really basic kind of a form. So you can have form title, form description. Then you might add some form elements to it here. And then whether it's submitted or whether the workflow finishes. You've got a few different options around that for a basic form to trigger the workflow. We've got when executed by another workflow. So this is effectively having like a parent and a child or multiple children workflow hierarchy. So you might have one kind of parent workflow that maybe talks to 5 different sub workflows, and it's going to fire those off depending on what it's aiming to do. Then we've also got chat message. So if we add that one here, jump out of it again, we've now got a chat message option. So we can see down the bottom left here, we get this chat, and we can actually just say, hey, and talk to the workflow like we do for ChatGPT or Claude. So that's a handy trigger. And then the last one is the other ways option, which I don't think I've ever actually used any of these ones. So there's a few here. There's email trigger, error trigger, local file, MCP server trigger and then n8n itself. You can have that trigger a workflow and then a server-side event occur. So most of the ones that I use, generally when you're doing a bit of development and testing, just quickly, you'll use the trigger manually. Most of the rest of the triggers for workflows will be either schedule or a webhook call. Occasionally it might be on an app event or maybe a form submission, and then the sub workflow or being called from another workflow. That can come up quite a lot too. So that's pretty much it for the user interface. Once you start adding nodes, each node will have its own interface. So let's add, for example, if I add Airtable, I jump into search records. So whenever you open this node here, you can see it's kind of split into 3 different panes. So we've got the left-hand side, which is input data. We've got the middle pane here, which is the action that this node is performing. And then we've got the right-hand pane, which is the output after we've performed this action in the middle. So this kind of layout will appear for most nodes. Let's open up a different one. Let's say Dropbox. Open that and we'll say it's create a folder. It opens it up, and again we've kind of got this layout here: input on the left, action in the middle, and then output on the right hand side. And you can see that the options here, we've got for Dropbox, we've got credential to connect with, we've got a resource, we've got operation, we've got folder. If we jump back into Airtable, we can see that it's got different options here. It's still got a credential one, but it's got resource now, it's got an operation. It's talking about which base you need to choose, which table, and then a filter by formula. And this is because of the operation selected here. So if I change the operation to get, the items or options available change as well. And just like if I change this from record to base, the options underneath it change as well. So it is dependent on, from top to bottom, what options you choose will dictate or change the options that you're given further down the middle pane here.